Thank you for joining us for the third and the last session of Track C, organized by China Future City Lab. And I hope you can hold on to the last minute of these 2 full days event. I know this is really intensive, and we are very fortunate that you are stick with us for this one last hour. And for this session, I'm pretty sure that for the past 2 days, you have been hearing the digital revolution over and over again in almost all the tracks, as it is radically changing the way that we, in the traditional real estate development industry. And at China Future City Lab, we work with researchers, policymakers, industry leaders, urban innovators to capture this multidisciplinary nature in this transition. And because of this digital revolution, it makes possible that urban planners, architects, engineers, computer scientists, and social scientists can work together in understanding, planning, and managing our cities. So our session will be more discussion-based, and to warm up the discussion, I would like to invite our speaker to share their story. And today, we are very fortunate to have industry leaders from Oceania and China fly all the way 30 hours to this side of the planet to discuss this interesting topic. And first, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Selina Short. Selina Short is the Managing Director for Ernst Young's Oceania Real Estate and Construction Practice. She's also the Global Real Estate and Construction Innovation Leader. Over her career, she has worked in real estate, pharmaceuticals, and the consumer product sector in Europe, Middle East, Japan, China. Prior to joining EY, Selina worked in London as a real estate advisor firm, where she was responsible for global capital markets investor strategies. Selina is also part of the Property Council of Australia's National Cities Committee and the EY's Future Cities team. Let's welcome Selina to share your story.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And as we sort of said at the start, thanks for staying with us. I think I did a trip which was Bali, family holiday, back to Sydney for 2 hours, went home, changed suitcase, dropped off the kids, back to the airport, and on my way to Boston with a lovely 6-hour delay in Sydney before we managed to take off. So I'm here, I'm awake. You all look awake still at this point, so that's a fantastic start. What I wanted to do today was really talk about the thinking that we're sort of evaluating at EY around smart. And there's been so much talk of smart. So what I wanted to do today was really just take a step back and think about, what do we really mean by smart? And for me, I guess if I'm being really honest and a bit blunt in this room, I think smart has been a bit overhyped and underdelivered. It's been this kind of tech panacea that was meant to solve all of these problems. And whilst there's been some really nice, great examples out there, I think what we lost sight of in this tech frenzy was what it really came back to in the other title in this heading of this session, which is the user. So what I wanted to do briefly today was really take it back to that user piece and talk about what we're seeing at EY around 3 key trends that are fundamentally shifting the view and perspective of the real estate sector from that user lens, and then what that means when you start to think about smart. So we're looking at 3 forces that are really shaping how we think about this. And they're essentially space as a fluid asset, space as a service, and space as a connector. Given we've only got a short amount of time today, I could talk ad nauseum about any 3 elements of that triangle for long periods of time, as some of my colleagues in the room know. What I'll do is I'll just do a quick canter through space as a fluid asset and space as a service, and then spend slightly more time on the space as a connector, which I think is really where the rubber hits the road. And I must admit, I planned this presentation obviously several weeks before coming to Boston, and when I sat there yesterday and listened to the fantastic talk by Eric Bryn-Joffelson and also Ira Winder's talk, I was like, oh wow, I've come to the right place. I felt like I'd come home. I was like, these people get it. They were talking about that really human-centric view of technology and how we have to be quite purposeful in what we're doing around tech and real estate and bring that back to the human. So that's what I'll touch on in Space as a Connector. But before I dive into that with a few more slides, let me just touch on these other two. So Space as a Service, and that is something that is getting a heap of airplay at the moment and is something that is really forming part of the real estate lexicon. The iPhone example really of real estate now, as we all know it, is of course WeWork. And they're someone that has fundamentally addressed this concept of space as a service and used tech, but used tech in a clever way that has really been about creating a user experience that has created differentiation. And for a company that within 8 years has gone from teeny tiny startup to a market cap of 20 billion, it's pretty incredible to see what happens when we change the way we think about the problems that we're all dealing with in real estate. WeWork, of course, is just one example of spaces of a service. You look at Tishman Speyer, who've introduced their Zo app, which means that tenants in their buildings can book yoga classes, they can book hair appointments, they can book emergency childcare, they can book medical appointments. Again, bringing that concept that the space you're in is not just somewhere you turn up and do some work. The space you're in is fundamentally a place that can serve all these other needs. We've also seen space as a service really coming out through other areas as well, whether that is looking at other places and facets. And the reason why there's the focus on this is it really gives two key drivers. One, it creates a heap of stickiness. It makes us feel more connected, more attached to that asset. It makes that tenancy a stronger and stickier tenancy. But also, it creates a whole range of potential revenue adjacencies that now sit around that core asset of real estate. So that's a huge one, and there's a heap of really interesting reports and reading out there you can do around that area, and I'd really encourage you to dive into that. The other one to focus on is space as a fluid asset, and this is changing quite dramatically. Again, you've got the poster child example at the moment, which you kind of can't go to a real estate conference and not have some kind of discussion about, and that's, Quayside, Toronto. And that has been fascinating because what we've seen for the real estate sector is we've seen one of the tech big five come in and fundamentally go head to head with the real estate sector around that development area. They're going to bring a completely different view of what a development looks like. They're going to have customer purpose at their core, and they're going to have a deep understanding of tech. The proposal, and I'm sure many of you would have read it, is out there in the public domain, and it makes for very interesting reading. And they've really nailed some of that space as a flexible asset, looking at how you use spaces, how spaces shift and change through parts of the day. So what might be retail in the day becomes temporary accommodation in the evening. Looking at how buildings are created to shift and change and deal with various uses. And while you can look at this, what at the moment is a bit of a digital dreamscape in Quayside, you can come back though and look at some very real, tangible examples of this as well. And I'm sure many of you are seeing that change in leasing, the need for more flexible leasing. And one of the really interesting ones I come back to on that is we all know about the whole dramatic rise of co-working. We know about the rise around sort of co-living, but it's often focused, and a lot of the discussion goes to the startups and those micro businesses, which is where this all began. However, what's really fascinating is that it's moving so rapidly on, and we would have seen the likes of, IBM entering into contracts with a WeWork, for example. If I look at our organisation, we employ 260,000 people around the globe in hundreds of cities around the world. What we've seen for our business is a real inflection point in history. So if you look over the last 100 years of EY's existence, we have grown as a business, and alongside that revenue growth, we have seen growth in employee numbers. When we start to forecast forward for what we need in the next 10 years, we are absolutely still predicting to grow, as any good business that wants to survive would. However, for the first time, we're seeing a decoupling. That growth will not come with, as we'd crassly say in Australia, more bums on seats. That growth will come through the use of robotics. That growth will come through the use of gig and contingent workforces, which will bring their specialist skills into EY. We'll need to surge up while we work on a big project, and then those people will go out and work in other places and take those specialist skills elsewhere. We've seen a dramatic decrease in the cost of our occupancy costs per person, which is essentially halved since 2007. We are now stipulating in many leases around the world that need for flexible space to surge and contract. And certainly in Australia, I've seen the major organisations who are going out to market at the moment absolutely mandating as part of that, really looking for flexibility around that leasing. So I think starting to think of that fluid space and what that means if you genuinely want to be a smart building, a smart precinct, a smart space, and the tech that's really going to be needed to support that is fascinating. So let me get into the space as a connector, because I think this is the one that really fascinates me. And look, what we know around space as a connector is, despite at the moment being at our most hyper-connected, all of the research is telling us social isolation is at its highest that it has ever been. We no longer go to the bank at the end of the week and bank our paycheck and have a chat to the friendly teller. We no longer speak to the person working at the checkout at our supermarket as we go through the automated aisles, nor do we speak to the person at check-in when we go to an airline. Technology has created these amazing efficiencies, but what it's also done is it's removed this interchange of human to human. Not only do we move those transactional interchanges, we've also removed the need to actually bother phoning or meeting up in person with friends or family to actually find out what they've been doing with their lives. We can find that out through Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook. And it's gotten quite extreme. What we know is that we humans are actually fundamentally sociable animals. We draw strength, and there is a whole lot that comes from being in community. So what is the role that property has to play? Well, it's quite significant, because what we know and what the research is telling us now is that social isolation is actually really, really bad for us. And therein lies the real rallying cry to the property sector. What role can property play around solving this? And the crisis is so bad that, a recent report that came out said that social isolation and the health impacts of that are the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's associated with increased cardiovascular disease, dementia, and high stress levels. In a work context, we know that connection at work creates higher productivity, higher engagement, less likely to take sick leave, and less likely to have safety incidents at work. The data is compelling. What we need, though, is that next level of research and that next level of smart insights that can come and tell us how we create better connection between humans and how technology becomes an enabler of getting humans connected, as opposed to what we've seen so far in that technology has actually caused more of a separation. So some of the really interesting work that we're starting to do at EY is looking at how smart precincts, and I actually like to even get away from the use of that whole term smart and really think about clever. And when I was preparing for this, I consulted, as he or she is known in my house, Professor Google, around what that real difference is between smart and clever. And basically clever connotates a sense of ingenuity and originality. And that's what we need. We need to bring this ingenuity back to thinking about how tech and humanity crosses over far more. And property is fundamentally unique in the ability to do this, because we have people in our assets all day long. We live in homes, we go work in offices, we shop in retail malls. Property has an incredible opportunity to create that differentiator. A recent report that was brought out by the Work Tech Academy showed that they believe there'll be a resurgence in a bit of a back to the future moment of guilds, where there will be creation, and we're starting to see some of this, of certain hubs around sort of biomedical hubs, around specialist hubs that bring together people with complementary skills, professions and experiences. And what we're starting to see in those spaces is really thinking about the benefits that can come when you bring like-minded tribes together to solve really complex problems. So I wanted to just touch on one specific development that is hopefully a bit novel to people in this room unless you've been to Sydney recently. And this is a development called Barangaroo. It's a really unique development. It was developing the last large tranche of waterfront development in Sydney. It's completed up to the point of, you've got Tower 1, 2, 3. It's completed up to the point of Tower 3 now, and those 3 towers are 85% leased. When this precinct is completed, the park at the end is also completed. When the precinct is completed, it will house 23,000 workers, 2,000 residents, and over 80 different retail shops and bars. And a lot of that is already up and running and fully functional in that completed component. It's the first major carbon neutral precinct in Australia, and it's also has a major IoT connectivity hub which allows for free IoT connection of any devices within a 3.5 kilometre radius. It's a fantastic development, and part of the reason it's a fantastic development is because of this. The data, and it will throw off literally thousands of data points, but this development has come to life with humans being at the heart. That photo there is actually my family. I'm lucky enough to live just over the water from the development. And this was at one of the street fairs that was put on for this development. And just as a side note, that little girl in the middle, she turned 4 last week. That's my daughter. I think she was the only child at the street fair who requested a redback spider face paint motif. The lovely chap that was doing the face painting did try and convince her to maybe go for a butterfly or something, but no, she was very determined to have one of Australia's most deadly arachnids on her face. So yeah, she stood out from the crowd. But this was a day of a street fair. There was stalls, there's face painting. This development fundamentally has a human heart. It is something where if you go on weekends, there are kids scootering around, they're going up to the park, there's families eating in the restaurants. It has really been developed. And now they're coming back to the data piece and thinking about how do they use that data to further enhance that human connection. How do they use that data to quantify that human connection so that it actually can show the translation into leases and into the value that comes through the people that are in that precinct? It's a really exciting development, and I can't wait to see the further completion of it. And I really would encourage you, if you do make your way to Australia, to please feel free to look me up and I will happily give you a tour around that development. It's an absolute standout. So you would have seen in that original inverted triangle around those 3 areas, there was the yellow ribbon weaving around. We love yellow at EY. I was talking to someone about our lovely yellow beam as I was coming up here. But around that yellow beam is tech and culture. And I purposely ended on tech because I fundamentally believe if you think that tech is this silver bullet, if you buy some cool tech, you set up an innovation hub, all your problems are fixed. Absolutely not. Tech is not the panacea to the challenges we're facing in the sector. However, let me be crystal clear, tech is absolutely fundamental to survival in the way this industry is going to change. It has to be part of the go-forward business as usual strategies as how we run real estate companies. However, it needs to be embedded in the culture. It can't just be tech for tech's sake. It needs to be embedded into how you're making and changing decisions. And I just put this slide up, which is another project that we're working on with a major office owner. And this is where tech, for me, genuinely does become smart, or actually really becomes clever. It's where you're using the tech and you're using the data to answer meaningful questions. And you look at some of the ones that we're looking around the office environment. Do my top performing teams collaborate differently? How engaged are my employees? And that's what we're using is a whole range of data sources to answer some of these really compelling and challenging questions that bring genuine business value and better human connections and better human outcomes. So on this one, I'll draw it to a close and we'll look forward to more discussion, but from little things, big things grow. Smart cities is just so complex. And I really do hope there is some super smart person at MIT who is beavering away in some lab that is going to solve this for us, because there are so many interdependencies and there is such complexity around cities. When I speak to organisations around smart cities, and I'm part of the working group at EY on that, I actually say for now, kind of forget it. go back to what's in your controllable remit. Think about how you make a genuinely smart, clever building. Think about, if it's within your domain as it was with Lend-Lease in the Barangaroo development, how do you create a genuinely smart, clever, human-centred precinct? And from those little things, big things will grow, because fundamentally we need to bring clever to this. And so I just thought I would end with a quote from a pretty clever guy who said, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. And I just love to end on that note and look forward to further discussion in Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Selena. This is really fascinating. Smart city is not a new concept. It has been 10 years, and we start to see the trend, like from the technology-centered to the human-centered. I really like your quote, data as mind and people as the heart. As smart is just a means, technology as a means to make our city more safer and more efficient. However, it's always the livable and gives the value to our city and make it a better place to live. Thank you so much for your story. And next, I would like to invite Ms. Qing Miao to share her story from the Innovation Gateway in China, Shenzhen, the city of Shenzhen, and in the surrounding area. Qing is the Director of Industry Innovation from China Resource Land. China Resource Land is the real estate arm of China Resource. It's a state-owned Fortune 500 company. Let's welcome Qing.
First of all, I'd like to thank Selena for her introduction. Just mentioned that a smart city will, in the future, will act as connector, service, and fluid asset. Next, I will show you what we do recently this year, and I think we just have the same purpose for the smart city, and you will see some examples. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the Director of Industry and Innovation Department in CR Land. And our department is in charge of the strategy and planning of industry real estate project. Here are some major projects we are working on. They are Shenzhen Bay Project, Nanshan FinTech Center, Hainan Shimei Bay Resort, and Guangzhou Incubate Industry Park. We build industry, university, government ecosystem into the real estate project to help to incubate the industry development. Here are some major partners, including MIT, Tsinghua University, Microsoft, University of Hong Kong, University of Technology in Hong Kong, Tencent, and the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. And China Resources is a diversified holding company registered in Hong Kong. Here are some numbers. You can have a general understanding of China Resources Group. And China Resources Land is focused on real estate development. At the end of 2016, our total assets value reached to 427 billion Hong Kong dollar, and developing about 115 projects in 7 cities in mainland China. Recently, with the changes in market demands, we also need to face the requirement of transformation and upgrading. And besides the traditional business, we also attempt to do some innovative business, which we call value-added service. Here you can see in Shenzhen, we have launched 10 projects in central areas. And by 2020, our total operating area will reach to almost 10 million square feet. The increasing operating rentable building area requires more professional operation management skills and experience. In an office building, there are 4 major scenarios. For owners, they want property rent revenue increasing. And for talents, they require enough space utilization. And for occupants, they hope work and life balance. And for visitors, they want smooth visiting experience. Those business imperatives impact our building designs. So for the owners, we offer them professional asset management. For talents, we offer them intelligent space management. And for occupants, we supply multifunctional spaces. And for visitors, we enable door-to-door ease access. So 2 years ago, we built one total solution for the office imperatives. So we called it Office Easy. Office Easy contains 3 major parts. They are spaces, service, and the system. Besides the traditional spaces like the office tower, the shopping center, we incubated several innovative spaces just inside our own projects. They are incubator, farmer, and the theater. This is the incubator. We call it Run Accelerator. Unlike the other incubators, we focus on helping startups building connections with customers. Those customers are most of them are just from our group, our multiple industries. And last year, we successfully helped startups to sell 21 innovative projects to the companies just inside our group. This is the C Theater with 600 seats. The feature of the theater is that it was located in a commercial complex. People can enjoy the show just when they finish the day's work or after shopping. This is our garden farming building. We called it 耕雨, means plant in rain. It was located on a roof of a shopping center with several grade A offices around. People can experience the fun of planting and enjoying the organic food just near the office. So now you can see that it's not just about the appearance, physical appearance or the location of the buildings anymore, but about its holistic offering and the drivers for the great convenience, creativity, and the communication. As to the service, we just mentioned about the space, then we focus on the service. Here we want to mention the visitors and visitor scenarios. When the visitor arrived at our building, through our face recognition system, we can verify their identification and recognize their emotion. And when they entered a meeting room through the smart lighting and the air conditioning system, we can monitor the changing of the environment and provide automatic regulation. And through the intelligent surveillance, we can easily find the potential risks. And when the visitors leave, they can quickly find their cars according to the indoor navigation through our smart parking system. Office Easy creates a new relationship between building sustainability and occupants' productivity to enable ease access and control to the building resources. We have 4 major systems. They are infrastructure system, asset management, value-added service, and system management. We also provide open API to enable third-party developers to access our cloud computing data, helping them build more and more applications into our ecosystem. Office Easy helped us with a more complete, flexible, cost-effective approach to the digital transformation from office development to asset management. As to the office business, at the beginning, we just focus on the sales and the leasing. Currently, we focus on the operation, brand management, and the building system platform. In the future, we want to invest more on it. We'd like to bring more work and life balance concept in the flexible, efficient space design, work with the city owners on load balancing and distribution of energy, keep increasing the environmental sustainability and reinvest facility management. We are looking for more professional partners to join us using their global leading technologies, helping us to improving our system. So let's build a great office place together. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Qin. My keenest question I want to ask Selena and Qin is that, so we work with startup companies like to deploy their innovative solution to the smart city infrastructure. I think one of the biggest challenge we met is the business model. So I want to get your opinion on what do you think is the payoff of being smart? Like I really like the vision of say put the human being at the center, the diversity, but as a business owner, you really have to turn it into a sustainable business model so that you can realize your bigger human-centered vision.
Yes, okay. Because you just mentioned the smart technology because last year we have worked with so many small companies. They supplied us some smart technologies. And I just feel that through the total solution I mentioned, Office Easy, based on the smart technologies, we can provide more complete, flexible service to our clients. And eventually, I believe it will achieve appreciation in value of asset. Mm-hmm. And this will stimulate us to constantly invest in the smart technology and work with the partners. And that will keep accelerate the service upgrade. And I think all of that will become a positive cycle.
Yeah, and I sort of agree. I think there's sort of two answers to that. I agree with the comments that were just made. I think particularly it depends on the market though. For example, at the moment in Sydney and Melbourne, we have, there is very, very low vacancy in office. So to lease something, you've literally just got to say, hey, this is for rent, and someone will probably come and rent it. Not a difficult leasing job, that one. But as the market becomes more challenging, you'll look for that differentiation. And I think also the investment, and if you can create really smart platforms and technology that does prove out, I think particularly that productivity piece, and that's the missing link which we haven't quite gotten to yet, but I know there are a number of organisations working on that. Because you take our organisation, for example, we don't produce things, widgets, anything. We are a people business. We charge our time and our brain power. If you can prove to me as EY that by being in your building, we can drive an extra couple of percentage points of productivity from our employees, and that would come through, as we know, higher engagement tends to result in higher productivity. That is massive. So I think where we're at is we're at this cusp of getting the linkage between sort of some of the stuff that I think we intuitively know, but we need to see that smart use of data to actually start to prove out some of these linkages that I think we sort of know exist. The other point that I'd make is that I think at the moment we're saying, where's the ROI on these investments? I also think what we'll do is we'll move forward where that will become less of a question because this stuff will just become BAU. And I liken it to, and I'm not sure if this dynamic translates to other markets, but definitely in A-grade offices in Sydney for top end of town type clients. 5 years ago, the latest and greatest thing was, end of trip facilities. You could ride your bike to work and be all sweaty and have a shower, blow dry your hair and go up and have a great productive days working. And there was a lot of discussion at that point around what's the return on investment, it's really expensive, it uses a lot of water, do we see the payback in rental values? That conversation just does not happen anymore. If you are renting an A-grade office to top end of town, it has end of trip facilities, and that is just an expectation of the building. So I think with some of this, as it goes from being sort of novel and new, it will just become part of a sort of standard expectations, particularly in that A-grade space.
just as you mentioned earlier, that tech becomes a culture, then it becomes more powerful because it becomes part of the people's lifestyle, the quality of life that you just cannot resist. It's very interesting that it seems the market you don't really need a very smart algorithm to tell your tenants actually the payoff of the smart technology will bring you more value to your customer. Secondly, so our lab is called the China Future City Lab. And I think one question we have been thinking about is that how can you be future-proof? So I'll give you an example, like all this investment in the smart buildings is billions of dollars, and it usually take a longer time horizon to build, like 3 to 5 years, such as the nano building at MIT, and they deploy so many advanced technologies. However, at the time of opening, it's very likely the technology is already outdated. So how do you make key decision to make sure your smart technology deployment will be future-proof?
I think. Look, it's a really good question. I don't think there's necessarily an easy answer to it. I think we're all kind of dealing with the reality of that. I think it's about having a flexible enough framework as much as you can set that up front to be able to adapt through the process, and also to be able to keep it open and be able to adapt once you've kind of moved into the building. And I think some of these modular techniques around construction, the ability to be able to change and shape spaces will help a bit. But the technology bit is challenging. I don't think it's, and it's not just in kind of connectedness in buildings. You look at it around, energy self-sufficiency in buildings, and there's a big focus at the moment in Australia on solar and batteries related to housing, and we're running a project. One of the clients I work with is running a project at the moment called the House with No Bills, and this house will literally not have a single utility bill. Everything will be self-sustained within this house, and some of that technology exists at the moment, but we're not quite there yet because no one's putting this, $20,000 battery on the side of their house because they know that in 2 years' time it'll be $10,000. So there's that whole lag effect with technology, which I think is, there comes a point though where you just got to bite the bullet and make the best decisions you can at the time with all of the information you've got, but keep the framework as flexible as possible.
Yes, it's very hard to answer because recently we tried to find the most world-class technologies, but I think new technologies invested every day, and we can make sure now we are recently used the most advanced technology or working with the best world-class partners. But just as I mentioned before, I think through the sustainable business model, we can continue to keep invest, keep upgrade. We are always on the right direction, and that is our sustainable business model, and that will keep us still on the right direction to look for the
I see.
right technology.
So I understand it's going to be a delicate balance between investing in the software and the hardware. I think people is more reluctant towards the hardware investment because as their value will eventually the speed of innovation will be fairly fast, and with the drop of the cost, and it will be more easy to maintain the software, like the flexible framework for the future technology deployment. Another thing I think I would like to ask is that you mentioned for what is being smart, and you specifically mentioned it's different than being clever. So I want to ask you, what can you use 3 keywords for your digital agenda? What's the most thing you think besides being smart? What's the city or your project should be achieved?
I want to use the sentence. Yes, when you mention smart, I think it is people-centric, and it is focused on finding out what we need and adopt to it. So, and I think that is the smart.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to say livable, sustainable, and I echo that thought, human-centered. And I think if you can achieve those things, and the technology is the platform that enables that, as opposed to it being, I think you'd ask, others, and they'd say, what's smart? It's technology. It's digitally enabled. That's the enabler. That's not it's the outcomes that we're trying to achieve through this. I think that's the important piece.
I see. So I want to go back to the previous question a bit. When I was in Shenzhen this March, I looked at the new building that you mentioned in your slides with the facial recognition. Everything is so futuristic and truly smart. And in a contrast, I see another building really built not that long ago that has fairly updated technology. However, comparing to the most cutting edge, you see it's still a big jump in terms of technology deployment. So I want to understand what's the challenges as the property operator or manager to see this transition from a legacy to smart zones.
I think it's a really good observation, and I think in lots of cases of buildings that are built sort of relatively recently with people that sort of know what they're doing, most of them have the smarts, but it's just how they get deployed and how they get used and some of the additional layer that's put around that. And I was kind of smiling to myself as you were talking through your example, because the office that EY's in Sydney is 18 months old. It's it's well rated. It's 6 green stars. It's got every credential that you could want. Being really honest, as a user of that space, do I feel like I'm in a super smart building? No, I just don't. And we are working on a project at the moment where we're looking at how people move around space, how you get better connection to the place and the space you work in. And one of the things that we're looking at from an EY perspective, and I'm talking to our global head of real estate, some of you might have met him here, Trex Morris, who looks after our real estate, whereas I look after our clients that work in that sector. Yeah. We're talking about potentially trying to create an app for 260,000 people around the world at EY that's on your phone. It's your staff pass, it's how you do your expenses, it's how you do everything that you could possibly need to do from an EY perspective through this one central app, no matter where you go in the world. But then you start to break that down and it becomes very, very complex. You look at sort of the multiple languages that would need to be in. You look at the different security regimes that would be in different offices. And again, when I take it back to the experience of our office in Sydney, despite being relatively new office, the security access is not compatible with what you would need to read a staff pass off a phone. Yeah. So already we're looking at additional investment costs to go and replace kit that was only put in 18 months ago, which sort of leads back to your earlier point. The other point that I'd make though is it's also going back to that human-centered piece, because again, our building has this, incredible well rating. We have all this filtered air. The air in the building is healthier than the fresh air outside the building. Yet as an employee, I know about it because I've actually gone and bothered to look into it. The average employee in the building would have no idea about that. But there's some really clever, subtle ways that you can start to build that in. So if you get in the lift, for example, at the end of the day and something pops up on the screen in the lift that says, today you've taken, 30,000 lungfuls of air. This air is more pure than the air you'll breathe when you walk out the building. This guarantees your sleep tonight will be on average 10% better than it would have been in a different building. You read that and you go, oh, I feel really good. Wow, that air's great. Yeah. It's partly psychological, but it's how you get people to engage in that space and how you use those nudges to get people to connect with the space. And the smarts are there, but we're just not making it real enough at this point.
Yeah, so I think we need a variety of flexible technology, not just to build on you, but also work with the legacy infrastructure, like to make them smarter. Yeah. How about Jing?
Yeah, and yes, just last year, we department just in charge of the upgrading of a traditional grade A building into a smart one. We just do the thing. And we do three things. The first, we upgrade the infrastructure.
Is it cost more?
We not just remove the old thing. We put some sensor in it and we upgrade it. Like we build a gateway and we put free Wi-Fi and we put some sensor on the light to make it can monitor the changing of the environment but we changed the camera because it was too old to cannot support our civilian system. And the second, we build a system platform. On that platform, you can control all the system and you can see the data through the platform. And the third is the most important one. We do a lot of training for our project manager, for the marketing team, for the leasing team, and especially for the asset management personnel. And that is the most important because we'd like to everyone on the same page. They understand what is the smart building, how the system will serve them.
I see. Yeah, you seem to have a pretty smart strategy to working towards this transition. Thank you. I will have one more last question, and I will open the question to the audience. This year we launched a new program, Future City Innovation Connector. So we are working with 10 MIT startup teams. We actually connect them with the industry partner to test out their innovative ideas and prototypes to pilot their projects in Chinese cities in different scale. Some is building scale, some is precinct and neighborhood, some is the city scale. However, they are facing great challenges. For reason one is that they operate in a traditionally heavily regulated area, which is usually fall within the city. The city traditionally has been operated by the city government's unities. Second is that they are facing competitions from the industry giants like the utility company, like the real estate developer. I know you two have a lot of experience working with startups and incubators. So what's your advice to these young entrepreneurs to enter into the smart city entrepreneurship landscape?
Yes, and first of all, I want to say that the smart city area is a very big market, and it keeps expanding. And there are so many opportunities and so many opportunities in there. And yesterday we met several startups in CFC labs, and I'm very impressed by their fantastic projects. And last year, we worked with so many small companies, just I mentioned. Here is my advice. Just focus on your product, your unique technology, your unique service. That's what we are looking for. Honestly, those small companies, we will not cooperate with them before, but now we are in a new market. We are looking for the technologies or the services just those startups can supply to us. So focus on your unique technology, unique service, and we need it.
So you suggest them to be focused on a very specific area of problems.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think I agree wholeheartedly with that. And what I'd add to that is the biggest challenge that I see startups face, in particular when they're trying to work with large organisations, is just a different kind of set of timings and capital constraints, and they're just operating in such completely different environments. Big companies can get a great idea and we can all sit in the room and be super excited, and we then wander back to our busy day jobs and stuff comes up and you're doing 1,000,001 different things, and that proposal might sit on your desk or that email might sit in your inbox for a while. But for that startup, that meeting was probably the biggest thing they had going that week, and they're waiting on that outcome that could then inject capital to be the lifeblood of that business. So you're just coming from such different dynamics. And I think one of the key things for me is working out within a big organisation, understanding your stakeholder map in that organisation as best you can, understanding who kind of gets it and who's going to be the sponsor in a large organisation to take that idea and bring it to life and drive momentum, and working with them and being quite open and honest around understanding the constraints you're working under as a startup. Like, you don't want to be there and be desperate, like, we got no money, help us out. But by the same token, it's easy for big companies to forget the very different dynamic that startups are working in. And there needs to be, in my opinion, much more appreciation at the top end of town around the hard yards that startups have to go through, and we need to get better at actually adapting our model and being able to respond in more timely fashion to be able to work with that. And I think linked to that, it's also finding those right avenues to build your profile as a startup. So the right sort of accelerator hubs, the right angel investor programs, whatever that is, knowing how to work that network to get the right profile built is really important.
Okay, thank you. So we will have some time for the question from the audience. Angie.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question was about the incentives that companies may have in adding these various services and these various systems to their buildings. One thing that you mentioned already is how much productivity gain am I going to get? But on the other hand, there's the notion that these spaces, in order to be competitive, in order to attract the best employees, the best talent to their company, you have to kind of give the employees what they want or what they think that they're going to get. And those two forces are not necessarily aligned always. And it's very hard to even know what gain you're getting in the absence of these feedback loops. Like, we don't actually know what the link is, right? So I guess I'm wondering how you think about balancing those two things, like giving services that are desired versus services that are actually going to improve the productivity of the firm, and trying to balance those two actors.
Yeah. And look, and I think there is some research that's coming through, and there are studies that are being done that prove that linkage. And we've done some interesting studies with clients, and also we've done it on ourselves as well. When you go from a move from an office that's sort of not as great into an office that's great, and actually looking, and I was in one of the presentations today where they're talking about Deloitte, who's one of our great friends in the Big Four. When they moved into the Edge in Amsterdam, their number of job applications increased fourfold because people aspired to go and work in that building. So there are actually some really tangible measures that you can get to prove out those connections. The productivity one I think is the one that we haven't quite landed yet, but everyone's working pretty hard on that, because if you can prove that out, it's quite interesting. The challenge, of course, comes from how do you actually measure that? And we've been dealing with that quite a bit, and we've been doing some interesting work where there's a whole lot of work that you can do behind the scenes where you're scraping what your employees are doing and measuring productivity in that sense. So how many emails they're sending, how many meetings they're having, where they are, when they are, where they're working, how many hours a day they're working. But that is an indicator, but you could kind of not bother turning up to work one day, put your feet up on sit in a park at home and come up with this killer idea that, brings in, $10 million. What's the more productive day, that versus going into the office and smashing out 100 emails? So therein lies that real challenge around productivity, but we are definitely getting a feel for productivity through some of this data insights around looking at what people are doing, and then overlaying that as well with the way people move through a building, and then overlaying that with engagement scores. So the surveys that you do, and again, that's where it goes back to that big data concept. If you can start to pull the stuff that people are doing, literally kind of tracking IMs, emails, calendars. You overlay that with all of meeting room booking data. You overlay that with how people are moving through space, and you overlay that with inputs around sort of performance reviews, employee feedback. You can start to get some pretty interesting pictures and start to track things over time and look at how you relate that back to space. But that's still a very emerging area, and it's also an area obviously that raises some privacy concerns. Where some employers, obviously that's within the employer's right. When you sign your job contract, you're pretty much that's it's perfectly okay to do that, but it's whether that's the right kind of cultural path to go down between employee and employer.
Thank you. Do you want to add on?
It's okay. Okay.
I guess.
Everyone's ready to go home.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. If without any question, I would like to finish our last but not least session. Thank you so much, Selena and Qing, to share with us your story across the continent, and we look forward to our collaboration and the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.